Hello everyone. In this video, we're going to talk all about short run costs. So what costs do firms consider in the short run and the long run? They have to make production decisions based on costs. And the short run, when we refer to that, we're talking about the period of production in which at least one input is fixed, because in the short run, we can't really change a lot of different things. Now, when we say long run, we're talking about the period of production in which all inputs are variable, and that's because we have a lot more time to adjust. Your text doesn't really expand on this difference very much, so this is kind of an important distinction to look at. But again, in this video, we're going to focus on those short run costs, meaning at least one input is going to be fixed. So costs in the short run, we have VC, or our variable costs, and these are costs that change with the rate of output, meaning the more that we make, these costs typically will rise. Fixed costs, or FC, these are costs that don't vary with output. So regardless of if we produce nothing or 100 units or whatever number we're looking at, these costs will not change within a certain range. And then total cost, or TC, is just those variable and fixed costs added together. So they use a lot of abbreviations in your textbook. TC is total cost, TVC is total variable cost, and TFC is just total fixed cost. Now, average total cost, or ATC, is the total cost divided by the number of units produced. You'll often see this written as ATC equals TC divided by Q, and that just means total cost divided by quantity. Average variable cost is just going to be your total variable cost divided by the number of units produced. So you'll see this written as AVC is equal to TVC divided by Q. Now, for your notes, I highly recommend writing these out fully, just because it's really easy to get a little bit mixed up or stressed out about all of these different abbreviations when you're in a time crunch. So I would make an effort to write those formulas out and maybe just list the abbreviations under them. That way you don't get mixed up whenever it comes to actually doing the calculations. Now, a little bit more that we want to look at, our average fixed cost, or AFC, is our total fixed cost divided by the number of units produced. And again, we often see this as TFC divided by Q. And then marginal cost is something that's a little bit new to us. So this is the increase in cost from producing one more unit of output. And it's our change in total cost divided by a change in output. So when we see this triangle in a formula, like the MC is equal to triangle TC divided by triangle Q, the triangle means change in. This is also known as a delta symbol. But anytime that we see that little triangle, it just means change in total cost. So beginning minus ending divided by change in total quantity, beginning minus ending. This graph right here is going to show you all of the different calculations for a particular quantity. So at quantity 0, we have no variable costs. Our fixed costs are 100, so our total cost is 100. Because our quantity is 0, these are all going to be 0 on that top row. So again, the red is going to be our quantities. We multiply by our variable cost per unit to go ahead and get what those total variable costs are going to be. But our fixed costs are not going to change. Those are going to be 100 regardless of what our production is. Now, in this case, whenever we want to figure out what our variable cost per unit is, we could take our total variable cost for our 10 units of 30 and divide it by the 10 and find out that our variable cost is $3 per unit. If we multiply 3 times 20 for our next quantity, we get a variable cost of $50. So you can see that that's actually going to be a little bit lower than that $3 per unit. But in your problems and on your exam, they're going to give you what those variable costs are. You won't have to come up with that on your own. But as you can see, that our variable costs are decreasing to a certain point, and then they start increasing again. Our total fixed cost divided by our quantity, you can see that that's distributed amongst more units. And then our average total costs are going to be our total cost divided by our quantity, or our AVC plus our AFC. Now, something important to kind of consider here. These are not difficult calculations. It's just a matter of getting everything in the right place. So at 10 units, or the second row, Our total variable costs are given as 30. Our total fixed costs are given as 100. Total costs are just variable plus fixed, or $130. Average variable cost is just going to be our total variable costs divided by our Q, or quantity. Average fixed costs are just going to be our total fixed cost divided by our quantity. And then we have our formulas for average total cost and our marginal cost. You can see here that our change in our total variable cost is just going to be that per unit change. It was 0 before, now it's 3. So that's going to be a $3 change. The change in quantity, it was 0 before, it's 10. So that's going to be a change of 10. And whenever we do that math, that's why we end up with that $10, or the $3, excuse me. This graph is going to show you our total cost curves. So we have our cost on our y-axis and our total cost, or quantity of Big Macs that we're producing, on our x-axis. And you can see that our total variable costs, it's a little bit of a wobbly line because they go up and then they start to go down per unit. Our total fixed costs are going to stay the same regardless of production. And our total costs are just going to be the sum of our variable and our fixed costs together. Now, we say the inflection point, this is kind of at 50 here, where those lines start to curve a little bit. And the inflection point of Q50 shows us that at first, our total costs are rising at a decreasing rate because of those gains from specialization. But eventually, the diminishing marginal product will cause the total cost curve to rise at an increasing rate. And this point is that inflection point. Costs are increasing at a decreasing rate, and it then switches to costs increasing at an increasing rate. So the entire curve is still sloped upward, though, because more production overall is going to mean more total costs. Now, this slide is going to show you our average cost curves and our marginal cost. So you can see here, we have our marginal cost curve. Then we have our average variable cost curve, our average total cost curve that we're going to add in here. So we have fixed costs, and then we have total cost. What we're looking at here, these graphs can be very overwhelming, but if we take it point by point, it's not so bad. Our marginal cost curve is going to show us those adjustments from one additional production unit or one additional Big Mac. Our fixed costs are those costs being distributed amongst the Big Macs that we're producing. This is downward sloping because as we produce more and more Big Macs, we're able to divide those fixed costs amongst more units. Our average variable costs are going to go down a little bit, but then become upward sloping because as we're producing more and more units, those variable costs are going to go up as well. And the same can be said for our total cost because that is going to be our variable and fixed costs added together. Now, this is just a mathematical relation. It's just kind of showing you how all of these different things are related. It's not something that you necessarily need to stress out a lot about. I would make an effort, if I were you, to just be able to look at these graphs and break them down piece by piece and be able to identify what's happening. And by that, I just mean that as those costs are increasing, what's happening to our quantity, and as those quantities go up, what happens to the different costs. So let's think about two examples. We have class GPA and sports statistics. So we're supposing the class average grade on the economics exam is 85%. Smarty McGenius, very aptly named, joins the class and gets 100% on the exam. What is going to happen to our class average? Do we think that it's going to go up or down? And the answer is it's going to go up, right? That 100 is going to bring our overall average up. Now, Lazy No Studdyson joins the class and gets a 34. What happens to the class average then? Well, in that case, it's actually going to go ahead and start to go down because that lower score is going to bring down the overall class scores. Now, suppose that LeBron James has a scoring average of 30 points per game. If he has a game that he scores 45 points, that average is going to go up. And if he has a game that he scores only 12 points, the average is going to go down. Once again, that average follows the margin, which is something that we want to keep in mind for all of these different examples and scenarios. Now here we see the average cost curves and the marginal cost, and it's just giving you kind of another example with those quantity of Big Macs produced versus the cost. This first click is going to add that fixed cost curve. As output increases, our average fixed costs will fall because, again, we're spreading the fixed costs over a larger and larger output. Like our MC and ABC, our average total cost curve is going to be U-shaped. The ATC, or average total cost curve, and the AVC, or average variable cost curve, will get closer together as output increases because our average fixed cost is getting smaller and smaller. Just like with the average variable cost curve, our marginal cost curve will intersect the ATC curve at its minimum point. It makes sense that variable cost should initially decline as a result of increased specialization, but remember, at some point, the advantages of continued specialization are going to be overtaken by that diminishing marginal product. So the transition from falling costs to rising costs is going to be something that we're particularly interested in, because as long as those costs are declining, we will be able to lower our costs by increasing output. Now, I know that this chapter has a lot of information in it, and the graphs can be really overwhelming. If you do have any questions at all, please don't hesitate to reach out. Otherwise, I'll talk with you in the next one. Thank you.